Welcome to this episode of Who Gives a Vote, where we discuss all things politics and some other things along the way. All the views expressed in this podcast are personal views and do not reflect the views of any organisation or entity that the participants may be involved with. So let's get started. Well, welcome to this episode of Who Gives a Vote. David, how are you feeling? We are talking about a topic that you've been very vocal on in social media, particularly on your Facebook page, around the around hate speech, around the things that sort of led to that. We're talking about Combatting Antisemitism, Hate and Extremism Bill 2026, which was announced, I suppose, released yesterday, was it, or 2 days ago?
Very recently.
Yeah, and it's now ready to be considered by the federal government in Parliament. How are you feeling about this topic?
Oh, look, it's a terrific topic. You know, any topic that combines politics and law, you know, trawling through 500 odd pages of legislation, it's bound to put you in a great mood.
Isn't it?
Your happy place, David.
Yep. And you didn't want to come tonight.
Oh, well, I was just a bit awed by the amount of prep, but I see you've broken it down a bit, so we're not going to try to unravel every section.
And Carly, how are you feeling about this topic? It's a big one.
Yeah, and it's a very detailed topic. It's very complicated.
Very
complex.
Complicated.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that we are talking about Combating Antisemitism, Hate and Extremism Bill 2026, and we're doing an overview. The structure this week is going to be different. Often we talk about a range of topics. This week we're talking about one topic, and we're not even talking about the entirety of the topic. We'll probably delve a little bit into, I guess, the hate component of the hate speech component of it, the freedom of speech that relates to it, but we're really going to focus on the process, how the bill was brought, the decision-making around that, the headspace and the criticism, I guess, and some of the feedback from community stakeholders in relation to this bill being processed or pushed into Parliament. Is it too soon? Is it not soon enough? They're the things we're going to be talking about. We're going to focus on the process rather than the content tonight, although we will drop into content. And I actually think this is one of those topics we could probably revisit the content on another podcast.
That sounds a great idea.
Because there's a lot to it, isn't there?
There is indeed.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what I might do is to give people an understanding of how much there is. Carly, there are 23 pieces of legislation, 16 acts and 7 regulations that are being amended as part of this bill. So a bill is about amending legislation or introducing a new act. This is actually just changing or amending 23 pieces of legislation.
And the explanatory memo is 319 pages long.
That's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, I didn't read it all today.
There's a lot to it. So let's look at those. Can you give us a quick rundown of what legislation is being amended or considered for amendment?
Sure. Okay, we have the Criminal Code Act, the Crimes Act, the Australian Citizenship Act, the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation Act, the Telecommunications Interception and Access Act, Migration Act, Customs Act, Income Tax Assessment Act, Auscheck Act, Australian Crime Commission Act, Administrative Decisions Judicial Review Act, Administrative Review Tribunal Act, Australian Border Force Act, the Aviation Transport Security Act, the Maritime Transport and Offshore Facilities Security Act, the Surveillance Devices Act.
And then the regulations?
Move on to regulations, yep. Is the Migration Regulations, the Customs Prohibited Exports Regulations, the Customs Prohibited Imports Regulations, the Customs Regulation, Auscheck Regulations, Aviation Transport Security Regulations, Maritime Transport and Offshore Facilities Security Regulations, and then the bill contains 5 schedules of amendments, which are Schedule 1 contains amendments to legislation regarding criminal law. Schedule 2 contains amendments to migration laws. Schedule 3 contains customs amendments. Schedule 4 contains amendments to firearms-related legislation. And Schedule 5 contains transitional rules.
So, David, this terror attack happened late last year, towards the end of the year. It's now January 2026. That much legislation to be changed. It's a lot of stuff to be considered in such a short time.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of legislation to be considered in such a short time. Before I come to that, can I just say a couple of things about the lead up to it? You know, it's not often I won't say that. The opposition and I are frequently have a different point of view, but on this occasion, I agree with Susan Lay's second iteration of her position. Her first iteration was that Parliament should be recalled before Christmas, and we should, the week before Christmas, we should pass a bill. That was absurd, and it always was. And now she realises why it was absurd, because suddenly she's confronted with all this material, and now she says that they need more time. She's now right. Albanese has the same problem. He didn't want to rush into it before Christmas, and that was right. Now he wants to rush into it, and he's putting a lot of pressure on the other parties and independents and so on to join with him, and that's wrong.
One may be a symptom of the other as well.
Well, I think you've put your finger precisely on it, yes. Yeah. Look, there's a huge amount of legislation in here. It's not uncommon for an amending piece of legislation to impact on several other acts, and sometimes it's quite trivial stuff, you know.
So for example, if it's around juvenile justice, the Bail Act Juvenile Justice Act, the Criminal Code and the Police Powers and Responsibilities Act might be amended, but they're all little pieces of legislation that tie into the same theme. So if you're detaining someone and you are allowed to ask them for identification, well, that's going to affect the Police Powers and Responsibilities Act. It's going to affect the Juvenile Justice Act. It's going to affect potentially the Bail Act. So there's a couple of different, but the theme is always similar. Mm. And often you'll, in a bill amendment where you're trying to achieve or address an issue, there's 3 or 4 pieces of legislation that are normally affected substantially and the others are ancillary. This is not the case. This is not usual, is it?
No, I think it's going beyond that. I mean, for a start, you've got those 2 major issues. The one, well, there's more than 2, but if we were to say, hate speech and hate activity in one corner and the gun law reform in another, I mean, there's not a lot of similarity between those 2 issues in terms of how you deal with them, even though they might both impact the problem you're trying to solve. Similarly, issues like amending customs laws and so on. I haven't looked at just exactly what those amendments are, but if it's a question of the circumstances in which we're going to cancel visas, then that's a matter you could look at next month. You could get your criminal code amendments in now and look at the other issues at a later date. There's a bit of a joining bills together like this.
Are they wedging?
Yeah, look, I think that's essentially it. It's not an uncommon thing to do in non-controversial things. There are plenty of amendment bills come up and they deal with half a dozen different, really disparate topics. And so of itself it's not a problem. But in this sort of instance, an opposition or other parties, the Greens, the Independents and so on, they're in the position of having to, if they like part of it and don't like another part, they're in a position of needing to try to amend the bit they don't like. But if they can't do that, if they don't have the numbers to do that, then it's a conundrum for them. Do they reject the lot or accept the lot? And it wouldn't be the first politician who's tried to sort of wedge the opposition in just that fashion.
The omnibus bills, which they're often referred to, where they put a number of bills in together at the same time, we'll go on to that topic. But it's important to also, there is not just one reading of a bill normally. So it would normally go before, in your first presentation, to the Parliament is the opportunity for things to be amended, things to be omitted, motions to delete or change things, and then it goes again a second time. So, like you said, it's not uncommon for more, I guess, different topics that are based on the same theme to be brought together to be dealt with in a Parliament that's obviously busy quite often, and usually to the consent of both sides, and often unanimously, well, from both sides of the from the opposition and the government. So it does happen, and it happens quite regularly. It just happened last year. There was a similar omnibus bill as well. So that does happen. I guess some of the issues that I think are really fair when you're talking about these types of issues is I guess as we're talking about the scope. And Carly, I want to read you the Human Rights Commission statement today. They made a number of points. I've picked one where they've sort of outlined their opening remarks in relation to it. And it says, these are complex issues which are vital to get right. Allowing only 3 days for this inquiry to review and report on this significant draft legislation is insufficient. It creates risks that the legislation will not be as effective as it should be or will have unintended harmful consequences. Do they have a point? Is that a valid argument?
I believe it is.
Yep.
Yep.
And so, when we talk about unintended harm...
How does it give the people who are voting time to, consult with experts or consult with members of the community that it might affect disproportionately to others? That is not enough time to go through everything that I've just read out, plus the bill and its explanatory notes, and seek, I guess, guidance if you wish to get guidance.
And David, you come from a legal background, and you've been involved with, and you've witnessed the amendments to laws. What can be some of the unintended harmful consequences if you rush through legislative changes?
Yeah, it's an extraordinary sort of thing to attempt. I've just reflecting, I think it's about 55 years that I've been working with legislation, studying it, reading it, working with it, interpreting it, relying on it in court and so on. They're very complex pieces of reading material at the best of times. I would have thought I'd take about 3 days of full-time work to get my head around this in an attempt to try to, analyse the issues and so on. And then that'll just be, the introduction to the textbook. A lot of our listeners probably haven't seen much in the way of legislation and amending legislation, but one of the problems with amending bills is that they often just refer to the principal bill in very short, brief terms. It might, for instance, say, and I can pick out a couple of examples. It might say, in section 279, omit the word that and insert the word which. Now, unless you go back to the Principal Act and have a look at that section, then you really can't understand what the impact of that amendment is. One of the amendments is to, in this instance, is to include the word national in a whole host of sections. Now, there's no real short way of doing it except to have, one act on one screen and one act on the other or whatever, and have a look at them and try to meld them and work it out. It's not a case of saying, here's the amended act and you just have to read that document. You're forever reading two documents.
And a third being the explanatory
both.
Notes. The explanatory notes help a little along the way, but they are also a little bit biased as well.
Yeah, that's right. They're there to justify what the draftsperson or his or her minister wanted to achieve. So it's a very tedious process, just in terms of the mechanics of it.
Yeah, why don't they? And I've often wondered that. Why don't they have the amendment, and then it verbatim how it was, and how it's going to be? That would make far more sense. I suppose for members of the public, it might be from back in the day when ink was important and you had to print everything. I could understand why, but when in the computer age, it should have the piece of legislation, the new revised option, and then what's being omitted, what's being changed. Surely that's a
Yeah.
much more effective way.
Yes, it'd probably be more effective even if you just repeated the whole section. I mean, obviously, if you're just changing to insert the word national, then you don't need to spell all that out. But you do to assist people to, you need to repeat the whole section.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if you repeat one section but the other section's in a different document, you've still got the same problem. Part of the problem is that, the criminal code's something like, I don't know, 600,000 pages or something like that. They're huge documents. And I guess it is a question of, the mechanics of controlling that. I mean, maybe a better way is to do it with that sort of, strike through kind of amendment, so that you strike through the stuff that's coming out, you put in the new stuff in italics or whatever you do, or underlining, which is the way you do it in legal documents.
Because if you did it just if you did it just that section that you've pulled out, and then what the new section or what the changes are going to be underneath it, then would that affect the context that comes before and after that particular section in some way? I don't think,
because you can go back and check context. It affects the context when you've just seen omit or add national, and that's the only context you get. There's nothing there. So going back to what you said about...
What's the technical term? A marked up version or something?
Marked up, yeah.
Maybe that's what...
So you said before, and I just want to clarify, when you said how many pages were in the Criminal Code Act, you said between 600 and 1,000.
Oh, look, it was a guess. I mean, I had a look at it this afternoon because I wanted to see what some of these omit-insert amendments meant. And then I got your note that we were talking about the context, not the detail, so I stopped reading.
But it sounded like you said 600,000, so I wanted to say...
No, it's not that. But there are 3 volumes of it, and the volume I was in was, I think, 600-odd pages. So
Yeah. And that was the Criminal Code Act, which is the federal
act.
That's
the existing act, yes. The federal. We're dealing with federal legislation, not Queensland legislation.
Yep. So when we talk about the focus of the bill, and there is a lot to it, I want to read the Human Rights Commission statement on that as well. It said we should protect all communities that face hate crimes. This means ensuring protections to cover not only race-related hate crimes, but also hate crimes against people on the grounds of religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity and disability. It is only by addressing all forms of hate that we can achieve social cohesion. David, you've had some strong views on that concept that hate speech just doesn't belong to one group. It's got to be across the board. What's your view on that? What's your view on what the Human Rights Commission have said there?
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate way to deal with it. In that, the government says, we'll come back and we'll look at that later. But if there's a provision that's going to apply to a section of people categorised by one of their characteristics, I don't know why that can't be expanded ever so slightly to cover groups of people by whichever categorisation they're being identified.
And does that cause division within itself?
I think so. Yeah. And I guess that's with the focus being on anti-Semitism in this bill, does that focus or diminish the aspiration that we should protect all communities that face hate crimes? Like, is that something that, does focusing on anti-Semitism diminish the fact that other people also need to be protected?
I don't know if it diminishes it, but I think it excludes a whole range of people who also deserve protection.
Yeah.
And to some extent, some of this, legislation is obviously going to apply to other groups, but it's those large lumps of groups. I mean, some of the major hate crime stuff doesn't talk about religious, identification by religion. It's by race, nationality, ethnic origin. So you can understand that some of the church groups will say, well, what about us? And then there's, LGBTI and so on. It is a problem in this particular draft. There are other things that I think people haven't thought through. For instance, there's a lot of stuff about hate symbols in the legislation. And while we won't get into too much detail on it, but I suspect I suspect there'll be attempts to bring complaints to the police and maybe charges for people, doing things like flying Palestinian flags. That would work both ways, because whatever argument you want to run in relation to a Palestinian flag, you could run in relation to an Israeli flag. If a Jewish person says I'm offended because they're I'm intimidated because they're flying a Palestinian flag, then somebody who's got family in Gaza that's being bombed and shelled might say, well, look, I'm actually intimidated by people flying Israeli flags supporting the people who are trying to kill my family. So it's, in that sense, it probably works in more directions than a lot of people have thought about. But
I noticed the same thing with phrases as well. I had been reading about it, and it was asked whether certain phrases could be banned by the bill, and the Attorney General Department said it was not possible to comment on whether certain phrases would be unlawful. And I think that's the same. It could go the same either way as well. Certain phrases.
Yeah, that's true.
They could be used in support of something in a protest or something, but then they could also be used in a negative way as well. So it could go both ways.
Well, my question is, I travel from Harvey Bay to Bundaberg every week, and I see a flag that says Trump. So
I see it too.
That, with what's happening in the world at the moment, do I have a right to feel, fearful for? Is that a
of driving past?
Yeah, I'm just asking for a friend. Yeah. So I mean, there is that, isn't there? So when we talk about I just want to read an article from the Financial Review, or part of that article, and it says, how can people know what conduct is criminal when the standard shifts within the terms of the law itself? Criminal offences carrying penalties up to 5 years imprisonment should not leave people guessing where the line is drawn. And Carly, that's your point, isn't it? They can't even guarantee that a comment falls within the definition of an offence where you could be liable.
Yeah.
So even our conversation tonight, you have to, if this legislation were through in its current form, you'd have to check yourself as to what you're allowed to freely talk about.
And curious that you should mention that. Yes, that's absolutely right.
And that ties back to unintended consequences.
It does, and the Media Arts Alliance that represents journalists is very concerned about that. They're saying this is really going to sort of limit what we can say. Yeah. And I suppose what's worse is it doesn't just limit, but you don't know how it limits it or to what extent it limits it. There's another curious provision in there. There are some defences in relation to various statements and so on, and the defences list, academic studies and that sort of stuff. But it also lists it can be a defence to comment if it's in a journal or newspaper article, but that's limited to professional journalists. Amateur journalists don't get that protection, and yet of course there'll be people, especially all over social media, who consider themselves in effect amateur commentators and so on. They won't have that protection. I don't see any way around that unless, Stuart, you start paying us for this sort of comment, or we'll be exposed to jeopardy.
Or we join the MEAA or something.
Yeah, so I think you're stuffed.
But it is, these are some of the problems that are being highlighted there.
Yeah,
it's a nightmare.
The Human Rights Commission goes on to say laws should be sufficiently precise so that it is clear what behaviour is permissible and what is prohibited, and so that there is consistency in law enforcement. The uncertainty and the shifting standards are a real concern in this bill. Is this an issue to you, David?
Yeah, it is. It is, and it all fits in as part of the same thing. I think I mentioned last week that I did a submission to an inquiry on anti-Semitism, and I pulled it out today. It's a 6-page submission, and it deals with just one topic. It just deals with whether calling for the abolition or elimination of Israel is anti-Semitic, and in what circumstances it might be. And I wrote 6 pages of that with a swag of footnotes, just with that question. It covers expressions such as from the river to the sea and that sort of stuff. Should they be should that be treated as anti-Semitic or not? Well, I don't think it should, but it took me 6 or 7 pages to work up, a discussion of that point.
So you said, I don't think it should. Do you think under this new legislation amendments, it could be?
I don't
They
know.
won't comment on it.
I don't know. They won't comment on it.
The Attorney
If
General's
they know, they
Department
don't
won't comment on it.
But it's probably one of the most talked about and disputed comments, isn't it? It's considered and labelled by some politicians as being hate speech.
It is. It's interesting. I just read an article the other day in the Overland magazine, which dealt with some work being done by an academic called David Sluky. Sluky, I think is Monash or Latrobe, one of those, and he's a Jewish associate professor, I think, and he's been doing a lot of work on this, and he's been appointed by the government to produce a report. He's done an interim report, which I haven't yet read, but I remembered, and this Overland article referenced it, I remembered he was interviewed by David Marr on Late Night Live on the ABC back in about April, and Marr put to him questions like, well, from the river to the sea means, that was our land and we'd like it back. I mean, is that anti-Semitic? And Sluky, notwithstanding that this is his pretty much, I gather, a major focus of his professional work, he wasn't sure. It might depend on the context, and so on and so forth. It was an interesting interview. Sluky, spoke very reasonably, and he said a lot of things I agreed with, but he accepted Marr's proposition that it's drawing a long bow to call that sort of comment anti-Semitic. So these are the sorts of things which it's one reason why, this bill shouldn't be passed in 2 days. It should be studied. I doubt most of the politicians will read it because it's too much for them to get their heads around, given everything else they're going to have to do in those, the next couple of days. It's too much for them to comprehend. There'll be some, who'll do better than others, but it's a huge task.
Or delegate it to aides.
And it doesn't give an opportunity to get submissions from the public to do the consultation that's necessary. Have they sat down with the Human Rights Commission and talked it through with them? So this is a 3-month project, and is there any harm in that? I mean, the prospects of there being another mass shooting in the next 3 months are pretty remote, and the prospects of that event, if it did occur, being tied to the failure to pass this legislation, I think is just an absurdity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back to that because we did talk about this last week, and I brought up a nuance of the fact that why does being pro something mean you're anti something else? Why does being pro-Palestinian mean you're anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish or even anti-Israel? In the same way, why is it that people, and I understand there's some historical and cultural context to the comment, but why does using the word freedom or free indicate hate? Like from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Freedom, like everyone in the land of Australia should be free, regardless of who you are. It doesn't mean my freedom doesn't rely on your lack of freedom. It shouldn't be that way, should it?
No, of course not. I think the traditional pro-Israel opposition to that expression is that they take it to mean Palestine will be free and Israel will, clear out. But there are millions of people around the world using that expression, and they're not all going to mean the same thing. There'll be a huge number of nuances in terms of what that should mean. And of course, Israel is practicing, from the river to the sea, isn't it? In that it wants to control it. I'm not sure arguing for a different set of controls should be a criminal offence.
There was a question here by Paul who's now joined our podcast team. He's not here tonight. Paul Truscott said, because this bill treats online speech as public comments and public comments as public conduct, who actually decides when strong or uncomfortable speech crosses the line into a crime? And how do we make sure that line doesn't continue to move over time?
I've definitely reflected on the line moving over time, depending on which government is in or how it's interpreted, because obviously it's very, very widely open to interpretation in its current form. So, yeah, I don't know whether I couldn't, when I was going through some of the content, like the summary of the content today, I couldn't see clear lines.
Yeah, that is a problem, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, the answer to that question, I suppose, is the courts are going to decide.
Yeah.
But there's so much that happens before then. I mean, there's a complaint from a member of the public. There's, the decision by the police as to whether they'll prosecute, the decision by the Department of Prosecutions as to whether they'll proceed with it, and then ultimately it's decided in the courts, and then perhaps goes on appeal. I mean, this is the classic sort of stuff that may go on appeal because of the High Court's determination that there's an implied right of free speech in the Constitution. And that's pretty well settled law now. I don't think anyone's really debating that. So to what extent does, are we going to end up in the High Court? Interestingly, there is a provision in the Act, without getting into the detail, which says that the Minister has to review it in 2 years, or at least some of the provisions, they review it in 2 years. That's a good idea, but in 2 years there could be a lot of chaos and a lot of expense and a lot of hurt for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's often a catch-all, isn't it? Because they're reviewing the legislation when human rights are, because you have to review it under human rights. If you're breaching someone's human rights, you have to review it in a certain period of time. But
Paul knows that.
Yeah, a lot of controversy.
Yeah.
A lot of controversial legislation gets reviewed, but does it really get reviewed? Is that just a way of pushing it through? So, well, it's going to get reviewed anyway, but once it's there, it's hard. It's very hard to dislodge.
Yeah. And reviews are often aimed at, I suspect, seeing how we can get the legislation amended tighter to more effect what I want to achieve as a minister, rather than to effect what is. Yeah,
we've heard community feedback and sentiment, and we've listened to them, and now we're going to modify it to
do what we wanted to
reflect. Community. Yeah, that's right. To ignore everyone.
I read today in regards to Paul's question regarding hate speech that a court would be required to find that a person charged with this crime had intent to cause hatred, and their conduct would cause a reasonable person from the targeted group to fear harassment, this is in quotation marks, fear harassment, intimidation or violence, or for their safety.
So the reasonable man test, that a person with the similar situation under similar with a similar intent would draw the same conclusion.
Yeah, it's a bit confusing the way the legislation is drafted, and without going into the nitty-gritty of that, one of the provisions seems to say that the reasonable man test or reasonable person test is a reasonable person from the group that says it's the target. So it's not a case of the reasonable person across the whole community. It's a case of, say, in the case of anti-Semitism, it's a reasonable Jewish person. Now, I can see that being particularly problematic. That's how I read it. And there's another provision in relation to at least some of the offences which says that it's a strict liability test, which I think is going to mean, well, it doesn't matter what you intended. It's a question of whether you objectively breach those provisions.
The Jewish Council of Australia made a statement as well, and they said, as a Jewish organisation, we take anti-Semitism extremely seriously, but rushing through sweeping criminal laws is not going to make Jews safer. Racism is not defeated by expanding police or migration powers or weakening safeguards on free expression. It is defeated by addressing root causes, investing in prevention, and building trust and solidarity across communities. Is this a case of too much too soon?
I feel like they obviously need to do something, but I think it's just that it's rushed. That's the issue myself. If, like David said, this is like a kind of like a 3-month undertaking, I think that is the main problem, because a lot of the issues that we're discussing about it could be polished up in that 3 months.
Yeah, and I think even that consultation process that you'd hope would be undertaken in relation to the legislation that can't be done if it's all going to be finished by this time next week, that consultation process has a great educative effect if it's done publicly and so on, because it can concentrate the minds of the broader community on the issues that arise, that we can all learn things from the experiences of other people, learn where the pinch points are and so on. And I think that would be just really helpful to not only to get the parliamentarians to tease out all the issues in more detail, but just to get the community to understand the problem in more detail.
As an educational process
As
in
an
itself.
educational process, yeah. I mean, the Royal Commission will probably achieve the same sort of thing, more slowly and more expensively, but there's no reason why we can't run this consultation process in conjunction.
Well, I guess my statement to that is, if a coronial inquest was done like was originally going to be suggested, wouldn't that inquest also provide support for recommendations to change legislation in a more informed way than this?
Yes, no doubt about it. I mean, you know a lot more about coronial inquiries than I do, but it's common enough for quite substantial recommendations to come out of that process. So interesting. The Jewish Council of Australia is on the outer with a lot of other Jewish organisations because it actually supports equal rights for Palestinians, and it opposes Netanyahu and the current Israeli government. And yes, they're urging caution. On the other hand, the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, which is a pro-Israeli and very active pro-Israeli crowd, pro-Israel crowd, they're urging the government to go ahead, notwithstanding these concerns.
The Greens have come out and said that they believe that these laws could be, or they, more importantly, they shouldn't be used to shut down legitimate political protests, including criticism of Israel's actions. David, this is obviously an area that you've had a lot of thought in, and you've had a lot of views on, and you've done a lot of research. Is there a risk of shutting down legitimate political protests with this type of legislation?
Yeah, I think there is. Yeah, I think there is. There's a lot of, if you read the social media and if you read The Australian, there's a lot of antagonism from the pro-Israel crowd towards demonstrations. I mean, Josh Frydenberg said in the last couple of weeks, he didn't, I haven't seen whether he said demonstrations should be banned, but he supported a finding of an opinion poll where the majority, a small majority, but a majority said demonstrations should be banned, and he didn't say in his material that's going too far. It sounded a bit like he was saying that's what we should be doing.
They probably polled people lining up behind cars that were kept in a roadblock because of a protest.
Yeah.
Do you think protests should be banned? Bloody oath they should. Ivor was probably one of them. It is a concern when an important part of democracy is communicating with your elected body, whether it be in the polls or whether it be on the streets, or whether it be making a phone call, or whether it be attending Parliament and having your say or voicing your objection.
A stern letter.
Yes, that's right. Do you think legitimate political protest is at risk based on such a quick, fast piece of legislation or a bill?
Yeah, I do. Yep. I think that, I don't know what level of risk it is. I'm probably not learned enough or well-read enough to comment on how much of a risk it is, but given that everything seems so loose and open to interpretation, I could definitely see how that could be a creeping issue.
I can certainly see a number of complaints coming out about particular placards and particular things that are shouted out and so on. That's almost inevitably what's going to happen with this legislation. I mean, I made a comment recently somewhere or other that there'll be someone complaining that a placard that says "Free Palestine" is anti-Semitic. So perhaps the placard should be changed to read "Equal Rights for Palestinians," and then you oppose that at your peril. But it's a bit more cumbersome to put on a placard than something like "Free Palestine."
Yeah, and I understand it too, because there were, if you look at American examples where, anti-abortionists were or anti-war people were protesting the funerals of soldiers, or they were impacting other people's ability to grieve and to be, to deal with their grief in their own way. And I think that's really offensive. Also, speech that leads people to commit acts of violence, or speech that has the potential, should absolutely be done away with. And there was a lot of work done with that. Pauline Hanson was subjected to that very piece of legislation that she's now advocating we need to have more of. So there is an important part of it, isn't it? But you've got to get it right.
That's right. Yes, it is important, and there are no doubt plenty of examples of that kind of speech, which has been problematic.
And one that incites one person might not incite a different person as well.
Yeah.
The same thing.
Yep. So when we talk about the what people refer to as the Omnibus Bill, the Omnibus Bill, what that means is it's a single piece of legislation that bundles together multiple and often diverse laws or amendments into one package. It allows them to be passed in a single vote, mainly for efficiency, sometimes to pass controversial items with less scrutiny. They put them all together. But in a very busy parliament, it's not uncommon. The issue with here is that there is so much legislation and so much community sentiment on two very different issues, as far as what one person or one community group might have a view on and what another might have a view on. It's very polarising. The federal opposition has a view that bundling multiple policy areas together is clumsy and forces MPs and senators into an all or nothing vote on fundamentally different subjects, especially where the coalition is opposed to the gun package, but they may not be opposed to the hate speech. But having said that, as they start reading it, you hear more conservative people coming out against both of them. David, do you agree with the federal opposition in relation to this, that it is clumsy?
I think that's right. We touched on this earlier, and I don't see that there's a problem with splitting the bills to deal with the two things in separate documents. Sure, they overlap and they try to deal ultimately with the same community issue, but they're so different in what the consequences of the legislation are going to be that you could deal with them separately without. The risk from a government point of view is that you'll get some of what you want to do passed and some of what you want to do rejected. I think that's just the way politics is. I don't. Carly used the word wedging earlier in our discussions. I think that's exactly right. It's an attempted wedge. The Labor Party tries that as well as anybody, and I don't blame the opposition for objecting to it. Interestingly, I heard just driving down here tonight on an ABC program that it looks like it'll be difficult to get it through because, for different reasons, the coalition are opposing it and so are the Greens. Yep. So it's going to be difficult to get it through the Senate. I
think the Greens are probably up for negotiation, though, from what I've read that they've got a problem with, which is including those other groups.
Which the Prime Minister's indicated that he's open to.
Yeah.
Again, adding more in a shorter period of time isn't good governance. It's not good legislation. It doesn't form good legislation to protect your community, but also to safeguard them from an overzealous piece of legislation.
I can see why it was tempting for them politically, though, given how quickly and how the opposition reacted, like the calling for a bill before Christmas and going so hell for leather on it, I can see why they might have been tempted to wedge them, but I don't think it's in the best interest.
No, I mean,
community.
Albanese has been very clumsy with this whole thing, in my view. I mean, to come out quite strongly and categorically a bit against the Royal Commission in the beginning,
So definitive,
was just unnecessary. I mean, that's this classic sort of stuff where you can simply say, we're going to consider that as one of the options, and we're going to take our time to view all the options and consult with all the stakeholders and the community and so on, and just hedge your bets.
He usually does hedge his bets too.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
he's
But
usually
he
pretty
kind of
talented
wedged
at that.
himself, you know.
Yeah.
And then, having done that and got badly mauled and had to backflip on it, he's kind of trying to, get back some brownie points in public opinion with this approach. So, I think he's been wrong on both occasions.
Should we split the bill or delay the bill?
I think
Or both?
both. I think you could keep hate speech, migration changes, and listing organisations as hate groups together. I think they could all be a group, but I think the gun changes should be their own separate.
What do you think?
Yeah, that's my view too. I don't see that any harm is going to be caused by dealing with it properly. We're not here to score political points. We're here to get good processes and good legislation in place that'll address the problem.
It's such a serious topic, and it should be something that, if we had a mature way of running Parliament, it wasn't so political point scoring, that they should all be working together in the best interest of the community, because it is a very serious matter and we don't want to see it again.
So David, split it
Yep, split it for me.
and delay it?
And delay it.
Here's a question I have for you. If you considered both of these as separate bills to be considered, how much time would you want as a legislator or as someone in Parliament? How much time would you want to be able to consider it, take it to your community, get community feedback, and then be able to go to Parliament with an informed view? What sort of time frame would you think you'd need?
I would have thought 3 months would give you an opportunity to canvass this, and I think that they can be canvassed together, and I think they should be. But that's not inconsistent with splitting the bill. There's no reason why you can't do your community consultation on both of
matters,
these aspects
yeah.
of it at the same
You
time.
can chew gum and walk.
Yeah, that's right.
So the Prime Minister could have easily come out this week and said, we have a plan. We are going to formulate and work on a bill for the next month for this, and on those two topics, we're going to present that to the Parliament on this date, give them time to review it, and then we'll do present the weapons bill on a different date and give time to consider it. And we're looking for community feedback, and we'll also support the federal police and the state police in ensuring that our community is safe right now. Most people, they'd still get criticised from the opposition, who, if they said they're going to do it, would say you shouldn't, and if they said we're not going to do it, they would probably say you should.
Same with the Royal Commission,
Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah, but most people would go, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, those sorts of policing aspects of it, the policing and the ASIO and that sort of stuff, the faults or the deficiencies in that aspect can be dealt with. Generally, it's not going to require any legislation. So a lot of those sorts of things about even better checks in terms of gun ownership and so on. A lot of that doesn't really need any legislation. It just needs better processes within the police and ASIO and so on.
And the Minister can provide ministerial guidelines to the Commissioner and say, these are the areas that I need you to focus on.
Yes, it's not going to hold...
Yeah.
Delaying the legislation isn't going to hold that up. That's no doubt already in place. And that, in my view, is going to be a major contributor to improving the safety of everybody. But the other, there are... The more you listen, the more you hear. Like I heard Anne Toomey, constitutional professor from whichever university, talking about it tonight, and she's got some major concerns about it. And there are just so many people out there who are experts on this subject, Human Rights Commission and so on. You need to give yourself time for them to explain what they think of it, where they see the problems and so on, and then you've got some chance of getting it right.
Well, they often say that if both sides of the spectrum are unhappy, then you've probably got it right.
Yeah.
But this is definitely a case where everyone's unhappy and you've definitely got it wrong.
I think that's right.
I feel like when I read through about the gun law changes and the hate speech changes, let's just break them up separately, that I feel like the LNP are going to have a bigger problem with the hate speech changes than they are with the gun changes now, because they're a lot more mild than I was expecting.
The weapons changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's been a massive reform in that. They've just got to tighten things up.
Yeah.
There's a few loopholes where, with the change of technology in weapons,
Yeah.
that you're able to shoot weapons faster, and so you can tighten those things up. You can
Yeah.
you can tighten your checks. You can. So I don't know if there'll be some things that they disagree with, but other things they won't. And what I've found interesting is that you do find weapons advocates now fiercely propagating why you shouldn't support this based on hate speech. So when you do put two issues together, then it conflates it, because you can have the opposition to weapons lobby
Yeah.
arguing about the changes to the
Hate-
weapons to
yeah.
and also arguing the hate speech, even if they don't care about it,
Yeah.
because they know that will ensure its failure.
Yeah.
So it's a really difficult thing, because, like you said, you're probably not going to get the Green support or the Coalition support. If you split them, you might.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any downside to Albanese for saying, okay, I've heard, I've listened, we need more time, let's table it in Parliament and go away and do the consultative committees in the Senate or whatever the process is, and get the community consultation going. I don't think he would lose points if he took that view even now, even if it contradicts what he said this morning.
Would he put the things together, omnibus it? Would he put it together because he might feel that one or the other wouldn't pass, so he'll put them both together?
Well, if I was Albanese and I was trying to be cute, I'd probably do it on the basis that, look, let's leave them together for the moment, but that can be part of the consultation and discussion over the next few months.
Yeah, I'd split them. There's too much. It allows too much noise. Split them 3 months and have a discussion. Then you can't argue about process. If people are saying they can't support it because of process, then it's an easy out. Whereas if you clean up the process, then you have to vote and decide on the content, and then you're held to account. It's easy for me, if I was a politician, to say, someone says, why did you vote against the hate speech? I'm an advocate for hate speech. I said, well, because I'm an advocate for the weapons and I couldn't vote on one or the other. The government forced it. It's
Yeah.
a cop-out.
Yeah.
Or it's a legitimate argument for some people who might want to vote for one and not the other. So I think the easiest way is tighten your process, clean it up, make it reasonable for people to consider, separate the issues so you don't conflate it, and then vote. Be done with it.
Sounds good
And it
to
doesn't
me.
get mixed up together in the,
Yeah.
like you said, the noise.
Yeah, and it then gives you a chance to talk about and investigate the things that you think should be changed. And I think that's a fair way. There is one more question from Paul, which is, most Australians want to stop real hatred and violence, but we also value speaking freely. How do we make sure that this law doesn't make people stay quiet out of fear of complaints or legal trouble? Well, firstly, do you think it will? And then how?
Well, the journalists obviously think it will. I think that was one of Van Toomey's issues tonight. Yes, I think it's problematic. I think it's vague. I think we need to think very carefully about what the defences should be, what the exculpatory provisions need to be. I mean, it's fundamentally, to me, fundamentally clear that there's a huge difference between a criticism of Israel's government and their actions and so on, and comment that's anti-Semitic, in terms of saying negative things about all Jewish people. It may be that some people confuse those issues, and because they're antipathetic, because they're opposed to Israel's actions, blame all Jewish people. There are probably people out there who are like that, just as I'm sure there are people who are critical of the Islamic State supporting organisations and so on, and Hamas and so on. There'll be people who are critical of that who blame all Muslims, and that's obviously not, in either case, not fair. It's not appropriate, but we do need to keep it very clear, both in our public discourse and in our legislation, that it can't be a criminal offence to criticise the conduct of a country, to criticise the actions of a country, and that's kind of the substance of that submission I made. That you really need to tease out, like if it was never a criminal offence to argue for the establishment of Israel. You can make a good argument that the establishment of Israel has been a monumental failure. Should it be a criminal offence to argue for its dissolution? Certainly, if you're arguing that we'll do that by actions against the Jewish people or even the Israeli people, yes, that's problematic. But if it's a case of, well, look, let's look at other ways where we can resolve this problem, two-state solutions, one-state solution with equal rights or whatever it might be, then that kind of discussion shouldn't be confused with being anti-Semitic.
Final thoughts on this bill?
I don't know. I honestly, I feel like they need to think about it a bit harder, but I feel like that they do need to go ahead with something along these lines. I think people need to be able to look into it in more depth before they vote, and like we've all said, it probably should be split in the best interest of getting the best outcome.
Yeah, take the time, consult widely, listen to experts, and
Do it properly.
look closely at your drafting, and as Kylie says, do it properly. Yeah.
And for me, it's really simple. I think you do take your time, you delay, you split it, you fix your process so that people can start having a conversation about the content, because we're not talking about the content, or not in a meaningful way, because when you start talking about process, then anyone can say anything about the content, even if it's true or not. So that's where it becomes confusing. David, thank you for joining us. You did have your son up. Did he play on the weekend?
He did. I had another engagement, so I didn't listen to the head banging, but I gather it was a great success and everyone had a nice time. Yeah, it was lovely to see him.
And how's your week looking, Carly?
We're back into the new year, so super busy at work. Nothing too exciting in my house.
It is a crazy time of the year, guys. Thank you for joining us on Who Gives a Vote on a really important issue, and I'm sure